Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of this session and this program representing Accenture. So myself, Ariel, and Kate are really excited to be here. We represent a part of Accenture called Accenture Song, which is everything around brand, customer experience, employee experience, product, service design, and marketing and communication. So we really like to think of ourselves as the creative of the huge company that is Accenture, 700,000 people globally. And then in particular, myself and Ariel, and I'll pass to them to introduce themselves, represent a team called Sustainability Studio, which sit within Song, and which we're primarily focused on bringing in and working on the trickiest sustainability challenges so that we could normalize sustainability work into everything that we do and hopefully help lead our corporates to help leave the world a bit better than we are in it at the moment. So that's kind of our guiding mission. So I'm one of the leads for growth markets here in sustainability. So growth markets is actually how Accenture divides the world. It's everywhere from Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand to Latin America. So we're covering quite a large footprint and incredibly diverse and rich in cultures, which makes this discussion very interesting. So lovely to meet you, and I'll pass over to my colleague Ariel to introduce herself.
Hi. So thanks, Lucy, for that introduction. I'm Ariel. I am working with very closely, Lucy and I, within the Sustainability Studio. My background is in design. So I guess coming into this, bring a sort of a long career in branding and service design and innovation, all across that spectrum, now into sustainability. So, really excited to have this opportunity to share, I guess, some learnings of ours around, designing for sustainability and how those two things, how to really use design to make our world a better place. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Ariel and Lucy. And good day, everyone. My name's Kate, and I'm in Canberra, Australia, and I'm assisting Lucy and Ariel deliver this workshop today. And I have a personal interest in sustainability and design, and I'm currently working in the service and business design sector in Accenture Song. And I'll be here in the background monitoring the chat and taking notes. So I hope everyone enjoys the session.
Awesome. So we jump to the next slide. So after this session, we hope you've developed an understanding of circular design principles with real world examples. We always find using real case studies is a great way to take this theory into action and hopefully land in your mind what you could do maybe in your business. Hopefully an understanding of how sustainable design considers social, ecological, and economic dimensions. An overview of 3 sustainable design approaches, which will hopefully enable you to view design for your own organization across people, planet, and prosperity dimensions. Assess how key trends across sustainable design principles may apply to your organization, and understand how to implement different approaches to sustainable design. So that's our intention. If we jump to the next slide, this is what to expect in our session today. So done our introduction. We're going to jump straight into a background around why do we need sustainable design, a little bit of a 101 on linear versus circular design, jump into a bit of the core theory around people, planet, prosperity framework, and then talk about some case studies as we go along to land that theory. We'll give an opportunity for some Q&As, and then we'll have a section which is talking about action and how do we approach this in a more tangible way to embed that into your business practices, essentially. So why is sustainable design important? So a big narrative that we are very big on and we've worked with the UN on is we truly believe we need a radical reinvention and rewiring of consumption models. And we believe sustainable design is at the heart of doing that. This idea of decoupling economic growth from negative environmental and social impacts will require producers to rethink design, production, and marketing paradigms as we once knew it. And so while this drastic changes face formidable challenges, there are encouraging developments contributing to an expanding knowledge base in the product development field. So key question just to ponder as we go throughout this is, how might we design in a way that addresses user needs and that can work in the long term within planetary boundaries? And that's very difficult, and we live and breathe that in our projects every day, and know that there is not one formula to do it. But I think having hopefully this framework that we're about to go through can help give you at least a beginning idea of what tools you can take into your own business processes and design processes. Great. So why is it important? So it's increasingly apparent that current patterns, as I've said, of consumption and production are unsustainable. There's some scary facts out there. I won't read all of them. You can read the slide, but I think this one in particular, we need 3 times the number of equivalent planets that people need by 2050 to provide the resources to sustain our current life cycles. That, when I read that and understood that, really hit home for me, that we are still in this extractive take, make, use, dispose way of thinking, way of consuming, for many cultural, societal, economic reasons. And this means that this is not a quick fix. This is a real systems change topic that we're talking about. And we've relied on this way of consuming for many years now. Another interesting fact, 65% of the increase in reliance on natural resources over the last 20 years. So we really need a change in how we consume. And I think that's evidence in the increasing rate of adverse environmental and social impacts. So we're reaching ecological ceilings through example of ozone layer depletion, ocean acidification, hard word to say, biodiversity loss, climate change. You can read more there. And then the other evidence is around destruction of social foundations. There's injustice and violence, food insecurity, energy access, loss of social equity. And we're seeing this play out and this is quite interesting for us from how we label growth markets, which is not growing. A large portion of our world's population are experiencing the worst effects of climate change, and that sometimes is a result from other nations that are high consumers. So there's a rebalancing that we believe needs to happen, and presents us with a really unique opportunity. And think sustainable design and design practices is a great way to get us through this tricky systems change challenge. So we jump to the next one. So there is a demand for sustainable design from many ecosystem players, from consumers. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that consumers are willing to and wanting to purchase and consume more sustainably. We're seeing this, we've done some research ourselves, we're seeing this in an Australian context in particular, but also in environments, in market units like India and Southeast Asia. There's also a consciousness that is growing there as well. Companies, so the obvious companies are adapting to more sustainable methodologies to develop and market products and services. And I think that the also opportunity here or demand here is that companies, and you on this call today, we really think the conversation around sustainability is moving and should move from compliance risk-based conversations to it's actually a growth opportunity area, and that there is a market to tap into and real value to be realized. And we'll touch upon this in the prosperity part of the framework later on. And then the last one, government. So we're seeing this in varying degrees of aggressiveness depending on the country around new legislation that is being put in place. For example, I know there's one piece of legislation, not in this part of the world, but in Germany, which is a very long German word that I'm going to butcher, but it's called Lieferkettengesetz, which I've definitely butchered, which is essentially mandating companies that are over a certain size to report on their scope 3 emissions. So there's not only a growth opportunity, but there's this pressure that companies will just have to act on this and act on this fast. So if we jump to the next one, we wanted to, before we go into the theory a little bit, and I passed to Ariel, just give you a little 101 linear versus circular design, because we're going to touch on this concept or area a little bit throughout this presentation. So I think it's important. I mentioned it a little bit just earlier on that we've been living in a system, a linear system, this idea that we extract resources and materials from earth and manufacture and make things out of it and sell it and then dispose of it without really thinking about what happens at the end. And then also, how are we caring for the things we take at the beginning? And is there a way we can actually connect the end and the beginning and make that circular? So that's the very simplified explanation around moving from a linear system or linear economy to a circular system or circular economy. And I think the main aspects to call out with the circular economy is growth is decoupled from the consumption of scarce resources. So products and materials are kept within productive use for as long as possible. And when they reach end of use, they are effectively cycled or looped back into the system. The goal of this model is net positivity. They're adding resources instead of extracting them through restorative models. So the circular economy has so many opportunities for businesses to explore. And when you start to unpack your own supply chain, value chain, and make that circular, because that's what we're talking about, there's so many opportunities for new products, service ideas that can tap into that growth and also lead to a better planet and social outcome. So with that little 101, I'm going to pass to Ariel to do a bit of a question.
Excellent. Thanks, Lucy, for your excellent explanation. I guess we'll take a little pause here and do a bit of a call out to you guys. And we've got a question around, what are some of the biggest questions you have about sustainable design? And we want to be able to, I guess, hear those, see those, so we can help to answer them along the way and, steer some of our focus, but also just getting you all sharing with one another to see if there's any good commonalities. So we're going to be using Menti. If some of you do or don't know that, we've got a code on the screen, so you can either scan your QR code with your phone and something will pop up to give you the answer to that, or you can actually go to menti.com and type in this code. And I'll just drop the question in the chat, which is, what are some of your biggest questions about sustainable design? So if you can hop onto this and start putting your questions in, that would be fantastic. Caitlin, are we going to be viewing those right away, or are we going to pause and look at them later? Oh, you got them up now. Excellent. What's the business case and the cost? Okay, business case and costs.
Why do so few companies do it? Is that in reference to sustainable design process?
Yeah. How do we get more companies to do it? I hope that by doing these sorts of things, slowly we are getting more companies to do it. And I think what Lucy spoke about when we think about business case and cost is, the way that we need to see and can see sustainability and, better sustainable design is seeing it as an opportunity. And obviously, as we think through the way we design and shift businesses, and this will be something which we are covering very, very shortly, people, planet, and prosperity. Those three things need to come together to mean that it's, these businesses are good for everybody, including the businesses that are delivering.
I might just, I'm just picking out one or two questions. Ariel, I think this question of how to balance customer requirements or needs, let's call them, with sustainable attributes, I think is a really good question. So we use a framework whenever we're designing a new product or service or campaign idea, whatever the output, called DVFI, so desirability, viability, feasibility, impact. And the idea is that as we get from hypothesis to maybe more formulation of that idea of what that product could be through to actually execution of that and building it, we make sure that we're constantly assessing it against those 4 dimensions to make sure that we're taking it all in consideration. I think the reality is, right, there's no silver bullet, and there's always going to be compromise, and depending on the context, what is needed. But I want to also touch on, I think there was another question up above around economies and people addicted to shiny new things. How do we change that for sustainable design? So building upon what I just said, I think there's an element also, we've got new research coming out called the human moment, which is about what is the relationship between humans and sustainability, and how do we help, brands, companies understand how to sell and consider sustainable attributes when talking about these products. And I think the main thing is, what we're saying is, it's not about having a separate sustainable product necessarily, or separate sustainable attributes. The real challenge, the real design challenge, is about every customer has a value set that they make a decision whether they purchase or use a product or a service. Value, convenience, price, etc. And so the conversation is not to have it as sustainability separate to that value set, but how is it nicely intertwined into that value set? Because I think that's where we come up across a lot of challenges, is that maybe a sustainable option is also incredibly inconvenient or more expensive. And so that's really the design challenge, in making sure we consider sustainability attributes in the context of the other value sets that customers would have: price, convenience. And there's some amazing startups that are doing that really well, that I think big corporates can actually learn on, which we can maybe share later.
Yeah,
I think also with this, oh, sorry, you go ahead, Kate.
No, you go ahead, Ariel.
No, I was just going to build on what Lucy was saying about the shiny new things. I think this is where brands and marketers play a key role in how we design or communicate or brand those things, and that actually make them appealing. And like Lucy said, alongside, they need to be convenient, they need to be affordable, they need to be all of those things. But actually, we've got an opportunity to make them even better. And that is through how we, shape and form those brands, how they connect to people's needs, and how they make people feel when you use them. Because ideally, I guess the best thing is if it's like the best product that's sustainable and you love it more than how it was before for all of those reasons. So I think this is an opportunity. And when I look at this, integrating sustainable design in industries not traditionally sustainable and design principles without losing profit models, I think it's often about thinking differently. So if you think of a business like Amazon, or sorry, I won't call Amazon out in particular, of a online sales business whose intrinsically is about selling new things, there are other ways to make a profit, but offer things like refurbished, rental models. So I think it's really like rethinking how you do business that can be more sustainable rather than stopping doing business. And we need companies, the bigger companies, to be really leading that and, driving that for customers. And, something like if Apple was to say, make their phones repairable or upgradable, potentially, and move to subscription models, those start to change the way people see and use products. And I hand to you.
I was just adding on to that, I think it's really interesting to think about the model of the linear versus the circular life cycle of producing and manufacturing and using resources and products. And I heard a really interesting question on the radio this morning, and I guess it can be a kind of rhetorical question we could leave here, is should manufacturers be responsible for the products that they put out there, like the life cycle of the products? It's not just about the shiny new toy, but it's also the packaging that it comes in, and whether they should be responsible for reusing that packaging to make more products later on, rather than it going out of their factory door and it loses the circular come back to them at the end. So I thought that was quite interesting, link back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, this is new, but I think that we all have, and particularly corporates, have a responsibility to do this. I think there'll be a point when government legislates, and as Lucy said, in Germany, there'll be a point where actually this isn't a choice. And in some businesses, they are going to have to rethink how they do things as legislation shifts expectations of what businesses can do. Is there any, maybe let's just jump to the presentation and we can answer. It's really great to see those questions, by the way, and I hope we can answer some of those along the way with the examples that we show. So sustainable design. The philosophy of designing physical objects, environments, or services according to the principles of social, ecological, and economic sustainability. So when we say, and I would also note that this isn't just physical objects, it would be digital too. And you know, the idea of how digital, the impact of, you know, data and digital is a consideration. And even the idea that digital can replace physical to create sort of services. But holistically, how we design according to a set of principles that consider people, which is the social, the planet, ecological, and prosperity, which is economic. And this very much, if you go to the next slide, you can see here, those three things really need to come together to be considered good design. And I think Lucy also alluded to the desirability, viability, feasibility, and impact is a slightly different, sort of more business-focused lens of working. In the past, business even only focused on desirability, feasibility, and viability. But thinking about impact and measuring impact and having impact in mind is something which is critically important as we design. But in this instance, we're talking about this framework, which is people, planet, and prosperity, and we'll focus on these three areas. We'll do a little bit of a deep dive on each. And this framework can be used, I think, as a kind of sense check as we design to ensure that we are considering all these aspects. And we can design, you know, with these lenses, then we are in a much better place. I think, you know, the world has very much looked for a long time around prosperity only and designed from that lens. And that's where I think we've landed in problems around people and planet. So we're going to go to people first. So people, if we think about people, it is really understanding who we're designing for, understanding what their needs are, understanding how what we're actually designing affects them, how the elements that we need to design to meet their social needs, their equitable needs, but also to understand that, you know, if we're putting that from a business perspective, that we're designing things that people actually want. So we'll go into a bit of detail around these topics and a couple of case studies. You can move, yeah, great. So there's a lot around the dimension of people. I think when we talk about the social dimensions of design, we can think about from physical mental health, so how the product promotes healthy interactions. So I mean, an example of this is some of the digital design that we see, and the nature of how something like Instagram or Facebook is designed to sort of doom scroll, or to have never-ending content, or the impact that is having on mental health and well-being. So, you know, as you're thinking about designing those things, how do you mitigate something like that? Safety, then we get to safety and security. So does the product or service keep individuals safe? What about the employees involved in its production? So we hear a lot about you know, fashion and clothing production and the people in factories. When we think about how we keep individuals safe, so, you know, the downside of some of the online forums is that it's connecting people with individuals that may be grooming them, for instance. How do you, as you're designing it, mitigate some of these issues? Diversity, equity, inclusion, is it available to all? Does it promote a more equitable society? And I think, you know, the narrative around sustainability is really the key to its growth and success is equity and inclusion. So if it's not available for everybody, we're never going to meet the scale that we need to. Economic opportunity, does your product or service increase livelihoods? Are people paid fairly? So, you know, is what you're designing improving people's lives economically, or is it creating a bigger divide? And then privacy and data. So does the product or service protect customer information? Is the company trusted by consumers? Now, in Australia, we've got a whole lot of stuff going on around data leaking and theft at the moment. But, you know, as a brand, that is an important part of what you need to do when you're asking people to give personal information, is how you can actually protect it. So by understanding, I think, all of these drivers and habits and aspects of people and humans, we're able to design holistically. So if I think of, we see here this, I guess it says here, understanding modern customer trends, but I sort of think about this as how we understand not just customer trends, but human needs, and put people at the center of the way we design. So human-centered design, HCD, is very much something that is used in the design world to really ensure that we are human-centric. So we're not designing for people, but with them. So when I think of you know, we're not just in the past designing what the business thinks is good for people. We're asking people what they need to improve their lives and designing for that. And that way you can really ensure that what is designed gets used, it's valuable for the customer, and it supports the business growth. So what you don't want to do is, you know, create a mortgage product, for instance, that nobody wants. And if you go all the way down the line and you don't involve the people in the design and you launch it and then it flops, you've wasted a lot of time and effort. So I think as you're designing things, you design it with the people in mind, together with them, and you have an iterative approach, allows you to build people's needs into the design. And when we look at designing with people, it can't be at the detriment, of course, of the planet. So how we use the understanding of human behaviors, our data, to design things that are more sustainable, and vice versa. And sustainability must be accessible to enable adoption. So something like data spending habits can help to drive decisions around sustainable products and how these might be designed and who might be the target audience. So I think it's very much this, you know, from the design perspective, is involving customers or humans in the process, understanding their needs and building that in, and then, you know, having that sustainability perspective alongside that. Right, so the next one around, so the reimagined customer, I think, you know, I think it's all, in some ways, when we think of COVID, it's reimagined lives for all of us. But I think what this has meant is that the pandemic has caused a huge shift on consumer priorities. If we think of the way we all work now, that never would have been something that would have been a possibility had the pandemic not happened. And things like the adoption of telehealth have, the pandemic has absolutely expedited the uptake of some things that we thought would take a long time to get there because they were uncomfortable or unfamiliar. So that's the example of telehealth. The pandemic's meant that people have shifted their expectations. They're really looking at what is important to them, where their values lie. It's made them very much more aware of things like supply chains, for instance. Like when we couldn't get what we wanted because of the supply chain disruption, it's meant that caused us to you know, stay much more locally, value community, be part of our the local small businesses. And you know, what we hear now is that these reimagined consumers will be abandoning brands they don't support and will pay more to those who do. So there's so much choice out there that as a brand, you need to be really designing for these people, otherwise they'll go elsewhere. All right, next slide, yeah. So we've got a couple of case studies here, which are really both really inspiring, actually, in my mind. The first one is IKEA, and a case study that's called Visibles. And IKEA has their vision is around designing for every person. That's not exactly it, but that's at a high level that's what their vision is. So they've really looked at how they can democratize the accessibility of furniture for people with disabilities. So in collaboration with an NGO, they designed a set of add-ons to IKEA furniture across 12 or something types of products that you could download for free and then 3D print either yourself or at a local maker's sort of facility, and it allowed you to adapt your furniture to those needs. So I saw that there was one that was a special handle for cupboards. There was a mirror attachment for a mirror that allowed you to see your bookshelf if you were in a wheelchair, what was on your bookshelf if you were in a wheelchair. There was some hooks that allowed a walking stick to hook onto the end of your bed. And what this did was, and again, that when you see this, it's thinking from a sort of diversity and inclusion perspective, but it's also in that sort of disability and less able people and making that their lives better. But it's also by, having a 3D printing and a open source design really provides the accessibility so no one is left behind. Right, next one. And I really love this one, actually, the Johnson & Johnson Our Tone Band-Aids. And when I saw this come out originally, I just, I couldn't believe that no one had thought about it ever before. Why are Band-Aids just skin color of a sort of Caucasian person? How hard is it to actually just change the color of a Band-Aid? And I actually looked at it and thought, oh my goodness, this seems so obvious. And I think sometimes things like this can actually just be right in front of your eyes. But what's great to see is that this has really been, in some ways, really impactful way of recognizing difference and helping people that are marginalized feel that they are represented in an everyday product like a Band-Aid. So Johnson & Johnson did this with the Black Nurses Association and provided free samples. But I feel, in this sort of instance is looking at how these sort of everyday brands can really think more broadly than what is and be more representative of a broader range of society. Great. And I think I'm going to hand over to Lucy for this now.
Yes, thank you, Ariel. So the second dimension part of this framework is around planet or ecological consideration. So in this, I'll chat about some components of ecological design strategy, ecological impact assessment, and we'll talk about some interesting case studies to bring it to life a little bit. So jump to the next one. Cool. So there's a lot to consider when you're deep diving into the ecological dimension of this framework. So essentially, we need to consider whatever we're designing for, we need to consider it within the context of its, again, entire circular supply chain. So the energy used, so how much energy does it take to create and use the product and service? Are there alternatives available that use less power? The water use, does the product or service require fresh water for its production? If so, does it analyze its impact on at-risk water basins? And we also know for consumer goods companies, this is a huge area, the topic of water, and it takes it to make the products that they make. There's a lot of water use, and it's a real issue around how they can make sure that those water sources are not depleted, and it supports the local community too. So that's a really interesting area. End of life management. So what happens to the product or service after use? Again, just extending the responsibility of a brand to not just forget after a consumer uses it, to take more responsibility to help bring that back into this circular loop. Biodiversity. So does the product or service production negatively affect terrestrial or aquatic biological equilibrium? So there's a whole lot of big words in there. What that means: terrestrial are ecosystems which are found on land. So there's examples is tundra, forests, tropical rainforest, grassland, deserts, and aquatic, which a bit more obvious maybe, is ecosystems that identified with the dominance of water. So streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, etc. And waste and contamination. So where do the byproducts or waste of the production process go? Does product use create waste, and how much, and what can we create, or what can we do in the overall product service experience that eliminates that waste or reduces that waste as much as possible, or repurposes that waste? So it presents multiple opportunities, but these are the main considerations that we think are important. So if we jump to the next one. So when we think about designing a new product or service, there's a framework for that one can use, or brands can use, called the ecological design strategy. So it essentially helps kind of break down the considerations that we need to consider for designing a new product or service. So the components are efficiency. So how can we reduce the number of replacement products manufactured and purchased by increasing the initial product's lifespan and efficiency? Disassembly. So being able to properly disassemble a product into separate parts to reduce waste. Repairability or longevity. So using a product for a longer period means buying less substitute products to replace it once it doesn't work anymore. Recyclability, reusability, giving a second life to the parts used, and equity. So how do we ensure sustainability concerns all? So it needs to be fair, impartial, and consider everyone. So these are, I suppose, nice strategies that companies can use to consider when thinking about how do they make their product or service you're going to design more circular. And these are some great kind of quick wins and proven strategies to explore that can help kickstart the ideation on what to include in a product or service experience. Yeah. So if we go to the next one, when designing a product for a product or service, you have to develop a sense of the priority areas which you need to address. So in doing so, recognizing an impact area and how it is impacted, so you can make better decisions on how to respond to this. So this is really important. It's almost like a checklist. You could use it as, again, prior to, during, and at the end, using it as a sense check as to what we're designing product or service, and how we're taking into consideration these ecological impact areas like air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, resource depletion, and just ensuring that these are top of mind, because I think a lot of these ecological factors aren't as tangible when we're thinking about, for example, creating a new beverage line, for example. How do we ensure that topics like impact areas like air pollution, land pollution are top of mind when we're thinking about the design of that? And we're thinking about it in context to the desirability of that product, i.e. how the brand is represented and the design of it, literal design of it, but then also how that shows up as a product in the environment. So we always find this is useful to have as like a checklist, and to make sure we're always considering and have these top of mind, to make sure we're mitigating for potential negative impacts like ozone depletion, acidification, etc., that we want to avoid. So I'll jump into some case studies that we think some brands are doing really well or have done really well. So HP, interesting model. We know HP is, printing ink distributor plus many other things. So they have a service called HP Instant Ink, which is essentially a monthly ink subscription service that cuts down the negative impact associated with printing. So in its simplest sense, it recognizes when your ink is low on your printer. I don't know about you. It's always a bit annoying when you have to then go out, get a new ink, go to the store, get a new ink cartridge, come back, and it's never in time, and then you can't print. Anyway, highly inconvenient. So this service essentially predicts when the ink is low, and then sends essentially a new ink cartridge, and also gives you a package so that you can dispose of your old ink cartridge, and they will take care of the proper recycling and redistribution of that. So there's a couple of different ways in which this is a more environmentally friendly option, and has actually led to a large carbon reduction, which is saying here on the side, so 73%. So it decreases the carbon footprint of ink purchase and distribution by 73%, while reducing energy use by 69% and lowering water use by 70%. So I think where that's happening is it's saving the customer driving to a store. It's reducing the packaging needed for the ink cartridges. So they cut down a lot on packages that you'd need in a retail environment. And where they're also helping is in the recycling of the ink cartridges itself, which sometimes customers don't do or forget or don't know how to do effectively and ecologically correct. So really interesting service there. So the next one is Nike. So Nike's made some pretty bold sustainability commitments as a brand, as a company. So this particular case study is talking about this essentially designing shoes through recycled materials from old shoes, plastic bottles, and factory scraps, which tackles issues of overconsumption and reduction in environmental waste. So, I mean, it's obvious in there, and I think Nike, by doing this, has also created a almost norm for other footwear brands to go down this path. So this is where we see, and talked about earlier, that this sustainability and choosing design sustainable products and services is also can open up new markets and create new markets or new growth areas that haven't been explored before, and are appealing to key consumers that are climate conscious. Another just example I just wanted to talk about quickly in Australia, that it's a startup called ZeroCo. I can put it in the chat so you can explore it. That's, I think, another great example in a more smaller sense, that it aims to remove single-use plastics, and essentially it's packaging, reusable packaging for things like washing detergent, shampoo and conditioner. But when you order it, they deliver it, you as a customer return it, and they'll refill it for you. So I think it's a great example of literally fueling the circular economy and making circular economy products or circular economic products more convenient for customers, because that's where a huge challenge lies with the whole, I've got to go send it back as a customer. Am I doing it to the right place? They take care of all of that for you and have monetized or have designed their business model based on that and monetized, benefited from that. Okay, so the last component of this framework is prosperity, so economic. And when we talk about prosperity or economic or financial considerations, we know we live still in predominantly, depending where you are, capitalistic environment where the products, service, business models that we create need to sustain itself, i.e. how to ensure the good that we're giving through hopefully more sustainable products, services that we're putting out there in the market, how to ensure that we're also able to financially sustain what we're doing. So actually we have a sustainable, or we like to call it a regenerative business model. And like I've kind of emphasized previously, we genuinely do believe that there are so many new revenue streams to tap into by producing more sustainable products and services, or redesigning as well. So in this, we'll talk about internal and external profit drivers and tools to minimize risk. And then I'll jump through a couple of examples. So what can the economic dimension of design look like? So what are some considerations when we're thinking about the prosperity component. So revenue, so how much profit does the product or service generate for the company? And how long term is that? I would add to how can we make sure this is not just a blimp of revenue, it actually is a sustained revenue trajectory. Brand value, how does the product or service affect the brand of the company? And so the whole idea of like brand risk comes into that a bit, and that's I think where the early conversations around sustainability have started, around making sure that brand reputation isn't compromised. But we're trying to really shift that from protecting brand reputation and for clients to think about, or companies to think about, actually, how can we use this as a brand differentiator, like a Patagonia? Patagonia is so overused, but I think it's overused for a reason. They're quite visionary in every sense of the word. Cost effectiveness. So what are the margins of the product or service? Does the production responsibility optimize resources? So I think a big misconception around choosing a more sustainable route is that it costs more. And there definitely are, there's a case for that in terms of needing the capital to set up maybe a new manufacturing process or bring in new types of talent. But when we look at it again from a long-term perspective and from a regenerative value perspective, over time, there is a lot of evidence, depending on industry and depending on product category, that suggests that it actually can become more cost effective. Thinking in particular, the renewable energy space is a good example there. And then compliance and risk management, I touched on a little bit before, but what positive and negative consequences does the product or service create, and how do you mitigate them? So if we jump to the next slide, so I think this is, again, when we're thinking about the creation or redesign of a product or service within our company, it's good to kind of drill down on what our internal and external drivers would be from a financial prosperity angle. So is it down the route of increasing revenue? So for example, is boost brand value and reputation important? Is creating greater value for customers and society? Is increasing demand and reaching new customer segments priorities? So these are just kind of considerations when we're thinking about this step. And decrease costs. So, are we able to save on more input costs of material, energy, transport, and distribution? Or, for example, another, or can we increase the efficiency of operations with sustainable design processes, which you definitely can. So these are just a checklist to help when we start this journey. Go to the next one. So we work like this all the time in our team, whether we call it the innovation funnel, whether you call it agile, design, thinking, doing, so many buzzwords out there. I think the point of these different processes, that's what they are. This is the innovation funnel, is that there's stage gates as you go from, we've figured out what a problem or challenge or client customer problem is, and then we've got stage gates at every point, from problem definition to idea generation to kind of business case of that idea, and then production. We've got, whether it's in sprints meaning 2-week normally time periods, that we sense check and go, is this still something we think we should solve for? And is this something we should keep investing our time and money into solving for? So I think this is a way to minimize risk of going down a path too far that actually isn't going to meet desirability, viability, feasibility, and impact, which is what I'd say where those red triangles are, the stage gates. That's what we'd use in every stage gate. Are we still, what we're at, is this still meeting the desirability, viability, feasibility, impact considerations? Yes, great, continue. If not, no, we pivot. So just to help us internal teams essentially work more efficiently and make sure we're true to the impact we want to have along the way. Right, I can't say this word. I honestly tried to say this word so many times. Bricolage, that's another way of calling it agile, essentially. So ensuring that starting with small actions and regular feedback loops from potential future users to maximize the use of experiment and trial and error. So we don't go too far and do 6 months of work and realize it's not a viable, feasible, impact or desirable oriented solution or idea. Okay, jump into one case study for this. So the Veolia case study is a global leader in optimized resource management. So they design and provide water, waste, and energy management solutions which contribute to the sustainable development of communities and industries. So essentially, Veolia utilizes sustainable and innovative system designs to convert the metal found in solar panels into valuable resources that can serve as feedstocks or building materials for new products. With a return of investment of more than 35% over the next 8 years in the solar panel recycling sector, revenue is set to reach $360 million by 2024. So you can see with their business model, essentially, they're filling a gap. Even though solar panels are great renewable energy technologies, they need to be recycled, and not just solar panels, other technology. So they're filling that gap in the market for what happens when solar panels become redundant, and how do they create a market from that pull out the valuable materials from that solar panel and repurpose it. So some of the materials, just to give you an idea of what they pull out and where they sell that to, glass is an obvious. So glass is used to create new glass. Very obvious, but huge market there. Aluminium frame is sent to aluminium manufacturing plants. Plastics are used to fuel in cement production. Silicon wafers can be melted and used by specialty recycling companies. Cables and connectors are sold as copper strap to be recycled. So there's a use for everything, and I think that's the beauty of this case study and this business model is they've been able to kind of figure out other uses and monetize from that quite effectively. Great. So I think as we're bringing all the three components together of people, prosperity, planet, the 3 Ps, it's fundamental to achieving our UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we really do feel that the SDGs is something that many companies are aligning and have aligned to within their sustainability reports. But the trick lies in how do you bring together multiple diverse perspectives to tackle them as fast as possible, and what role does your company play? And what we try to encourage when we talk to clients is around what role plus who can you partner with to try and act on those SDGs as fast as possible, because we generally feel like this, again, I'm going to go back to this linear way of trying to solve a problem is going to take us too long to hit and achieve those SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, sorry. So how can we leverage the power of partnering to achieve that faster, and all embedded into the people, planet, prosperity framework? So just going to give you a quick example of a company that we think has done very well to tick kind of all these considerations of the framework of people, planet, prosperity. So Bidco Africa. So just a little bit of context as to Bidco Africa, who they are. So they're a leading manufacturer for fast-moving consumer goods. And they've designed specifically a procurement process that fulfills the people, planet, and prosperity dimension. So they essentially are an umbrella brand that have, edible oils and fats, hygiene and personal care, and also most recently food and beverage brands. So they cover a whole lot of different product categories. So in that, there's I think even more emphasis on making sure their procurement process is planet, people, and prosperity conscious. So I'll just drill into a little bit about how they've ticked off some of these dimensions. So on the planet side, Bidco contracts farmers to grow and supply bamboo, macadamia, and coffee husks to generate power for its factories. So that is really a circular source of power generation. From a people angle, Bidco collaborates with 30,000 farmers across East Africa, offering small-scale farmers opportunities for partnership and employment in oilseed production. And there's some strategic partnerships with youth entrepreneurship organization to promote upskilling and market access. This is really important. This is something we talk to a lot of the companies about, is around extending again your sense of responsibility along your supply chain, and ensuring that where you're getting your material from to make your products or services is they're supported, and that their local communities feel supported, and you're supporting minority communities. And we talk about that a lot, especially in Australia, in terms of involving our First Nations people and how we can pay respect and give a sense of prosperity to communities like that, so that it is not a one-way kind of engagement, that we're giving back value to the communities that we're taking from. Really, that's a really important factor, and really important in terms of this topic around regeneration and regenerative value. And prosperity. Bidco offers farmers a ready market for their products at competitive market prices, and in turn the company secures the raw materials needed to meet market demand. So there's a strong value exchange in which they've set up here, that the local farmers can benefit from equally as much as Bidco can benefit from, to maintain and sustain its business model. So as the last thing before we jump into a mini Q&A break, as a bit of a summary, it's sustainable design for the SDGs. It's a connection point to the SDG ambition program. So sustainable design encourages a systems thinking mindset, which will enable you to design the comprehensive systems to approach your own SDG ambition benchmark. So again, we talk about, and this is a big change for all of us that are used to a more linear, reductive way of thinking and doing, that we need to think beyond just this is the problem and this is solution. This is the problem. These other people, partners, share the same problem. What can we come up with as a system of ideas to tackle that cluster of problems? And I think the people, planet and prosperity framework is a great way to kind of link all of those together to help guide whatever solutions come out of that are effective. Inputs of outputs of sustainable product design can be directly tied to several of the SDG ambition benchmarks. It's hard to, I suppose, do a one-for-one, because to be honest, I think it touches on all of them if we're really thinking about sustainable design in its entirety. But a couple of call outs: definitely it contributes to net positive water impact in water stressed basins, zero discharge of hazardous pollutions and chemicals, 100% resource recovery with all materials and products recovered and recycled or reused at end of use. Okay, I think we might jump to then a mini Q&A break again.
There was Aaron on the Q&A panel also typed some questions in. So I wonder whether people want to actually just put themselves on and tell us what your questions are. Great. If not, type them in the chat or in the Q&A. But I'll just read out Aaron's questions and see whether we can, in the meantime, answer those. So first one is around what ecological impact assessment factors does one have to consider if a company is providing services rather than products? Now, I might hand that one to you, Lucy.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to get access to the Q&A section. I think I've got it here.
Okay.
What ecological impact assessment factors one have to consider if companies providing services rather than products? I mean, I think it's it's a good question. I think, so if I go, I don't know if we want to, whoever's driving the deck, if we want to go back to the slide 26, just so we've got it up there. So I think from a service perspective, a lot of it is around also like how consumers get to that. So thinking again, I'll start with more the whole value chain, or the whole, let's call it customer life cycle in which they would use that service. So say, I I'm not sure. They need to go to, I don't want to say a brand on here. They need to go to a telecommunications store to get their phone fixed, for example. Or again, I'm not going to say a brand, but to think about, well, the customer has to travel to that store. So that's, you need to consider then air pollution in that, what form of travel that they may use, what's the most frequent or most common form of travel to get to that destination. Is there an average CO2 footprint for a customer to get to your store, knowing kind of the customer base? And again, this is so dependent on the type of service, but I'm just trying to land it in one like more example with, say, you're going to get it fixed. And then it's also the employee carbon footprint a little bit too. Like, what are they needing in doing the service? What are they needing to, how are they getting to work? What are they needing to do maybe to help the service? So are they needing to contact other suppliers? Are they needing to travel themselves to get something checked? Again, depends on the type of service, but what's their footprint in helping that service? And then is there any other, another consideration is digital interfaces. It's actually a huge source of carbon emissions, digital interfaces and the systems in which power these digital interfaces. So what are the digital interfaces that are maybe being used in that moment of service? And do we know what that footprint is? And how can we make sure that we can reduce that and make it as convenient as possible? It is tricky when it's service, it's not as tangible, but again, in any, whether it's a product or service, what we try and encourage is think about the entire life cycle, customer life cycle, from, someone thinking about wanting to use the service to then commuting or going to that, then in the moment of the service, and then after the service. So you can still think about it in a circular way. And also, like, it can get really technical, and I won't go on and on, but it also can be, what is the building or the infrastructure in which that service is being conducted, and what's the energy footprint of that location or physical structure, and how can you reduce that? So anyway, it can get this, I think this area of ecological impact assessment and life cycle assessment is actually highly technical and complex, and needs a fair bit of time to go into the whole measuring it, equating it, and then figuring out how to improve it. But we would do then a life cycle assessment to get into the nitty-gritty detail.
There was actually also another question here from Jade around how does sustainable design apply to service industries, which I think you've sort of touched on that in terms of the ecological assessment aspect of it. But I think that it does apply to service industries in lots of the ways that Lucy also said. And again, I wonder, is there a specific industry you had in mind? But if you think of how, if you're talking about like travel services, then everything around that will have a footprint, from the sort of building that you're using to the way that the people that are using those travel services are getting to your location, to the transport methods that you're applying, to the way that you pay the wages of the tour guides that are providing those services, for instance. So I think it's, because it's not a physical product, I suppose in the same way, we're not thinking about the sort of physicality or circularity, but I do think that services have lots and lots of like aspects to consider, that where you would be considering the sort of environmental and footprint and impact across for people as well. I mean, was there a specific industry, Jade, that Laura, that you had in mind? Okay. Anyway.
All right. Shall we move on?
Communications and PR. So actually, communications and PR, and it's good to have something specific, is in communications, one of the things that we've been talking about with our team in the sort of marketing communications industry is the footprint of like production of ads and how you could sort of encourage green production. So, you know, the impact of the sort of carbon emissions that are associated with advertising. So if you think of some of the aspects of what actually goes into producing communications, I think PR, do you have any ideas on PR, Lucy?
No, not PR per se, but I was just looking at Aaron's question, which is a very valid question about consulting services like Accenture. We've looked at ourselves very heavily. And I was just about to type Aaron a response, but a couple of things we're looking to is, you know, to consult, we need to travel a lot. And actually, Accenture is one of the largest clients, users of Qantas services. It's scary before pandemic. So travel, reduction of travel, using more virtual forms of meeting is definitely a priority and what we're focusing on a lot, which will help reduce our carbon footprint. It already is reducing it. It's also the other things that we are using as consultants that we then are relying on to then consult. So, you know, the types of food that we have in our offices and how we can support local communities through local brands, and we're not buying packaged food and beverage, and, you know, we're more conscious in what kind of food and beverages we have in our office, and also, again, the efficiency of our offices. So we've got a huge program of work that's underway about making our offices and our locations carbon neutral or positive, like I say, more net positive. So yeah, there's a lot of different initiatives we're doing that again are, I suppose, thinking broader than just the point of consulting. That's one aspect, but then what we as consultants use and how we interact, i.e. in our buildings, how we eat, etc. We're trying to make sure that is more ecologically conscious.
And that's what any business, I suppose, can do no matter what you are, is look at your own operations and look at sort of energy reduction, supporting your staff to be able to use reusable things, having waste disposed of in responsible ways. So that is something Accenture's doing, but also, you know, Accenture's push in the sustainability space from a consulting perspective and the embedding of sustainability in all we do from a business perspective is, again, our commitment to supporting our clients. And, you know, on RFPs that we respond to, often there's a requirement for us now to say what we're doing. So, you know, we're all being put into these positions where we have to, you know, do better.
Just conscious of time, Ariel, should we jump forward into the action section?
Yep. Great. All right, I'm going to race through these things. So approaches to sustainable design. And I think we've seen quite a few examples of these things throughout the presentation, but there's a lot you can do within a business, depending on what the business maturity, the business needs. And these approaches can vary from, you know, inside of the box and incremental all the way through to out of the box and more radical. And I think that this is, you know, the business have different risk appetites and different needs and different kind of requirements depending on where they play. So if you think of redesign, would be more like optimizing existing products and services for existing markets. So if you think of improvement or changing in packaging of products, you know, reducing, moving away from to like plant-based compostable packaging versus plastic. Could it be alternative sourcing of ingredients or more efficient supply chain, reduction in production? So this is around sort of redesigning aspects of your products incrementally. In the middle, new product development is looking at expanding product and service lines to new business lines for the company. So if you think of something like low, no alcohol beer is an extension or a new product development with a kind of known category, but is supporting sort of better, healthier living. Or if you think of plant-based meat as a more sustainable alternative to farmed meat. Waste into value. So how do you for instance, supermarkets are taking their bruised fruit and turning it into orange juice. So, new products that can be better. Then you've got the sort of far end, which is really transformative. So looking at going from these sort of single-use linear type of models that are products to service systems. So, and developing this market for the service that mitigates these kind of product development externalities and waste. So if I think of more circular models, could that be refilling services, rental or sharing models like Rent the Runway, tool libraries, car sharing services. So that's that kind of range. And I think sometimes as a business, depending on the maturity, it's really hard to start on the right. It's always about, I think, understanding, where your business is at and where the right place is to play. So if you go on to the next slide. So the redesign overview. We've got the sort of 3 stages in that would be identify the goals. What are you trying to achieve? What do you think is going to be feasible for your business? How do we do it with gains from an innovation and a sustainability perspective, but without major organizational operational changes? So this is a sort of smaller risks needed, and it can be executed through your existing set of, existing team, existing products and services and capability. So identify the goals, generate ideas and prioritize based on impact assessments. Where have we got, where can we make the most impact and what can we change? What are the ideas to change it? And then look at product development, testing and evaluation. But always looking, I think at this point is this same kind of iterative approach that Lucy spoke about early on is, not going from 1 to 3 without, validating and having sort of these stage gates along the way to check that what you're doing is actually being validated by your business and your customers. And so by setting your criteria for set your criteria for these impact assessments to help determine which of the opportunities that you want to move forward with. And thinking about, whether circular concepts can be introduced, or whether that is something that's sort of too far for where your business is at. Do you want to go to the next page? I'm going to talk about one example here. And just to save time, but we've got on the right-hand side, Coca-Cola created 100% plant-based plastic version of their products across several countries. Now, I mean, Coca-Cola are a huge contributor to sort of plastic waste. So if the idea that actually Coca-Cola it's still the same product, it's still in a bottle, it's still sold in the same places, but actually the bottle itself is made with something different, with a better alternative. So that I think is a good example of a product that can be redesigned with the planet in mind. If you go to the next slide. So new product development, so expanding your products and service lines. And for the benefits of doing something like this is that if you want to make this kind of longer term impact across the pillars, introducing new products and services are often needed. So iterative change is great, but it often will not get you to the long-term accelerated impact that's needed. And this radical innovation in new products can lead to breakthroughs and leapfrog ideas that advance societal goals and company success. I think as a large business, what you'll find is that there are a lot of startups who are quickly gaining because they're not hampered by the, I guess, structures of large businesses and shareholders. There is a lot that your competitors now are not always the competitors you think they might be. So really kind of keeping up with and being aware of the threats to your business and the innovation needed to continue. And if we think of the 4 steps here, so what are the company's goals and strategies? Where do we want to go? This is an opportunity to be visionary in how we are doing this. What are some ideas or the concepts that can go alongside this? How do we develop, design, and market these? And then how do we produce them? But of course, as we are thinking about producing new products, is what is this full cycle? How do we manage them from an end of life perspective? You know, how do we ensure that by buying this product, we're not having a detrimental impact on the planet? And some considerations here is looking at the time horizons and what is the business model? What do you need to do to get the return on investment? And how do you measure that? I guess in consideration to long-term and short-term goals. How does it fit in with your current strategic initiatives? And what are the risks associated with this new product or service? Are you prepared to take on those risks and fit that alongside the way your business currently is? And what's your journey to get there? Go to the next slide. I really like this one on the right, the all-inclusive deodorant. So from Unilever, they produced Degree Included, which is the world's first deodorant adapted to provide easier application for people with disabilities. It's a new product, but again, it's one of these really simple things is how do, they've designed it with for one-handed use with a hook design that's easily gripped. It's got a braille label. So for people with vision impairment, physical disability, then it's truly inclusive. And I saw recently HSBC, I think it was, designed cards with different cuts in the side of them. So when somebody picks them up that might be blind, they can actually, feel that card and know which card they're using depending on their others. And this approach to inclusive design really does offer a reason, not only is it great for the people, but it offers a differentiated a differentiation for customers. So customers will not only, people that need those things, but other business customers will be, have a positive view of the brands because of that. If you jump onto the next slide. So the last one is really this product to service innovation and going from your sort of linear single products that are into markets that are more designed to have for services. So this was, in the example of HP and all the printer waste, how would HP design a printer that considers, what's a service that could actually, mitigate all this waste? And I see on the street in our council cleanups, pretty much every second house has a printer because they're so cheap. So, how do you shift the model to allow to give consumers what they need, but have a better impact? So in this, benefits of this would be lowering the financial threshold that customers must meet to acquire expensive products. So things like rental and lease, and it's got that, again, it's got the people and it's got the planet perspective and the prosperity, in that clothing rental might be cheaper for your customers. They get something they want, and then there's not that intrinsic waste. It increases customers' access to a company. It can eliminate the burden of end-of-life treatment, and it presents an opportunity for companies to design products for disassembly, replacement, and recycling. And if you think of often, businesses that are services, if done well, you build really, you're able to forge better relationships and better trust and connection with your brands. So if I look at the steps within this, looking at opportunities within the existing system, is there a product market fit? Is there an opportunity for, is this something that you believe would be valuable to you and your business and to the market and to people? What are the ideas that you think would be most promising? What's the business case for that? Are these going to be viable, desirable, viable, feasible, and impactful businesses? How do we test these concepts? Start small, look at strategic pilots. You don't want to do something which is hugely risky without which can be risky without incrementally sort of building up and testing that, and then looking at implementation for how you sort of make that shift. And the opportunity in this space is huge, because what you can do is you could open up your brand or your business to a whole new marketplace, a whole new direction. And some considerations around this would be, how does a new service affect the company's brand? Do you have capabilities is it going to positively or negatively? Do you have capabilities to actually do this? And how will it affect the trends and motivations of the sector? So next slide, I know we're almost out of time. All right, I'm going to go for Philips lighting as a service. So Philips introduced from, buying your light bulb as a one-off and throw it out at the end as lighting as a service. So they'll be coming in, designing, installing, operating and maintaining your lighting, and helping you make a plan to use your energy. You have to have energy efficiency. And in the end, it's a win for the business. You're providing a service for a customer, and then you're also reducing the impact, the impact on the environment. And this service, as a great service, will be valued, and often you'll find that people, where possible, will pay more for a service that is really supporting a need that they have.